Hello everybody, good morning. I think we're all joining a bit late today, so I'll just give everybody a chance to connect. We'll give everybody a few minutes. I know it's Monday morning, it's always harder on Monday, isn't it? But if anybody, as always, has questions or you want to say hello, pop it into the question box. Anybody do anything nice this weekend? I met a real human being for a walk yesterday. It was wonderful. I'd forgotten how much I missed having sort of contact with people outside of my household. It was delightful. Oh, Monty, I'm so sorry, darling. Revise, that's not great, is it? Okay, I won't tell you about my lovely weekend then. When are your exams? Are they very soon? They must be, mustn't they? In June now. So very good morning. Oh, next week. Oh, sweetheart. Well, very good luck. We'll all keep our fingers crossed for you. So everybody, lots of positive vibes to Monty so that he do well in his exams. So yes, so very good morning, everybody. I'm just giving everybody a bit of a moment to join. I do appreciate it's Monday morning. Hopefully you're all sitting comfortably. Grab yourselves a coffee, a tea, a glass of water. Find somewhere comfy to sit and join in with us. Oh, Danny, you were meant to have 2 A-level exams this week. Oh dear. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing that you don't have them or not. Can I just say, in my opinion, A-levels are the worst moment. All I can promise you guys is that once you get past A-levels, everything becomes so much nicer. Oh, Safia will be sitting an A-level exams today as well. Oh, I feel like you're all with me instead of doing A-levels. I feel quite special. Good morning, Olivia. Yes, very well today. Thank you, everybody. Well, all I can promise is I will try and make this session more interesting than an A-level exam. Does that sound acceptable to everybody? I don't think I've ever said that before. How interesting. Lovely. So we've got about we've got quite a few of you online now, so I think we'll get started. I know, Janet, it is a low bar, isn't it? More interesting than an A-level exam. I'm not pushing the boat out for Monday morning. You can tell me at the end whether you thought it was more interesting than an A-level exam or not. There we go. Those of you who are supposed to be sitting in on today or this week. Lovely. Well, a very good morning, everybody. And I do hope those of you who weren't revising had a lovely weekend and enjoyed some sunshine, and those of you who were revising that you had a productive weekend and that you felt like you've improved in something. So today we are doing session 9 in our series of 10 webinars, and today we're looking at teaching a skill. Now, just to be very, very clear here, when we teach a language, we divide our teaching normally into 2 sort of sections. We have what are called systems and skills, and our systems include our vocabulary, or lexis as we like to refer to it, because we like to use posh words, our grammar, our phonology, and what we call our discourse, so sort of, if you like, how we join things together. Those are our systems. And then we have our skills, and as I'm sure you're all aware, in any language we have 4 skills, and the order of acquisition, so the way we acquire our skills in our own first language, is that we learn to listen first before we speak, and then we learn to read before we write. So that's the order that we learn our skills in. However, when we're dealing with people who are learning a language as a second language, then you might find that those skills you're you tend to teach them sort of much more at the same time. But as we mentioned last week, you'll remember that your passive skills or your receptive skills are generally at a higher level than your active or your productive skills. So generally speaking, we can listen and read at a slightly higher level than we can speak and write. So if your students sort of say to you, oh, you know, I always have problems with speaking exams, or I find it very difficult to write, that's totally normal. And in fact, in our own main native language, we also have the same issues, generally speaking. Okay, so we're going to have a look at how to teach a skills lesson today. And my outcomes for today are, I want you to really help you understand why it's important. I'm sure you do realise, but I'm going to choose one particular skill that's of great importance and great interest to me. I want to have a look at what's involved. So teaching a skill, so teaching somebody to listen better. What does that actually mean? What do we do in order to help people do that? And then, as always, I want to have a look at some practical techniques, give you some ideas of what you can do in your own classrooms. As always, as we're going through, if you've got any questions or comments, please pop them into the questions section in your control panel, and I'll do my best to answer as we're going through or at the end. Okay, so let's start. So my question to you first of all is, why is reading an important skill? So you see I've chosen reading today. This is something that I hold very dear. I'm a massive advocate for reading. So why is reading so important? What do you think? Yes, Maisie, wonderful. It really improves your vocabulary. Absolutely, my darling. It also is really good for your grammar, isn't it? So not only are we expanding our vocabulary, but we're really coming into contact with grammar. Fabulous, good. Very important for comprehension, Olivia. Yes, good. So really being able to understand, if you think about on a daily basis, you know, we need to understand everything, don't we, from sort of something as simple as a signpost all the way through to something more complex, perhaps like an academic text if you're revising. Yeah, so sort of sentence structure, so what we call syntax. Connective, so absolutely, those form part of our discourse, don't they? All of those things. Any other reason that reading is important? Think about what reading enables you to do. What does it help you do? It does, Danny, brilliant. It helps with writing. So the first stage to being a good writer is actually to being a good reader. Excellent. It slows down the learning process. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Simon. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, it can really increase your attention span, Maisie. I love that. Good. Yes, it really helps to focus and build up your cognitive abilities. Wonderful. Yeah, time to understand, Simon, absolutely. So yes, it's a good thing, isn't it? It gives you a chance to sort of process, because the good thing about reading is that you can read, and if you don't really sort of follow, you can go back and start again and sort of go through it and follow it, can't you? Good, excellent. Yes, so this is a really good point, Olivia. So it helps to be creative in speaking and writing. And this is something I really want to sort of to comment on as well, and that is that we very rarely teach something in isolation. So one skill is always connected to other skills, as we'll see as we go through today's session. But as you've all pointed out, it helps improve your vocabulary, it helps improve your grammar, so your syntax, your discourse, and you'll remember that those are systems. So we don't teach anything in isolation. There's always a connection between different things. Okay, lovely, well done. So these are some of the reasons that I'm a massive fan of writing. Okay, so as you all quite rightly said, it improves our language knowledge, doesn't it? Wonderful. What I really love about it as well is it builds autonomy. So if you are a good reader, you have access to knowledge, and knowledge is amazing. You can study for yourself, you can find out information for yourself, you're not reliant on other people. How important is that as a life skill? This is one of my key reasons for really loving reading, is that it really develops what we call our cognitive ability. And I think, Maisie, you mentioned attention span, didn't you? Wonderful. And it really develops what we call our HOTS, so our higher order thinking skills. And I'll have a look at that a little bit more in a moment. So not only do we look at sort of comprehension, which is what we would call our lower order thinking skills, but it also develops our ability to empathise, to be creative, to build our own opinion. It's so important. It widens our world knowledge by reading perhaps fiction from different countries, by reading newspaper reports, by reading anything that's produced by somebody local in a different country. You're learning something. So I was watching a wonderful TED talk the other day about by a poet, and she was talking about how reading allowed her to access worlds that she didn't have personal experience of but wanted to know more about. Now, if that isn't a good reason for reading, I don't know what is. Now, Olivia, you said this. It builds the other skills. Absolutely. So nothing works in isolation. Now, you'll see that I mentioned their higher order thinking skills, and this is one way that we can look at it. So this is Bloom's taxonomy. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. And the idea is that at the bottom here, we've got our sort of lower order thinking skills. So our ability to recall information, our ability to locate and name things, our ability to, if we go up to comprehension, to understand, to summarize. So basically, we're always just working on the text. We're not applying our own knowledge to it. However, as we move up Bloom's taxonomy and we get to the more exciting stuff at the top, so for example, when you are looking at assessing theories, comparing ideas, these are all skills that we really need when we go on to further education. So if you're dealing with students who want to perhaps come to a UK university, these are skills that they're expected to have at university. Now, there are certain countries around the world that do not value these within the school system. They like the students to stay down here. Does anybody know why? Why might some countries be a little bit suspicious or wary or worried about teaching those skills up at the top? Any thoughts? You've all gone quiet on me. Why might some countries not want their students to be able to do these things? Yes, Simon, exactly. It questions the political establishment. So it questions the status quo. So if you think about countries where there isn't perhaps freedom of speech, there's more of a sort of a dictatorship going on, where they don't want people really developing their own opinions, or certainly not in a way that they haven't controlled first, then you might find that these skills are lacking. So when students from certain countries come to the United Kingdom or to the US or to Australia, and they go to the universities there, it's quite you often find that they haven't really developed these skills. They're very good down here, they're amazing down here, but this is a real challenge. Okay, so yes, Maisie, questioning the leadership, good. Oh, Olivia, yeah, so you do have to be proficient in a language to get up here. So if you're working, this is a good point actually, you need to be strong in at least one language. Doesn't matter what language, but if you want to do higher order thinking skills, you have to be very proficient in one language. So if you're dealing with students who perhaps have got very low levels of literacy, they might well find this track challenging as well. That's a really good point. Okay, so I'm always a little bit suspicious of countries that want to introduce bilingualism because it sounds good. You've got to be very careful because you need students to be really, really proficient in at least one language. By all means, introduce other languages, but make sure they're proficient in one at least. Good. Okay. So, and reading can really help us get up here. This is one of the skills that helps us get up there. So if we think about reading, I want to have a little think about what's actually involved, because how do you teach reading skills? What's involved? Now, the key with any skill is that the skill is the overall sort of big thing that we're looking at improving, but all skills have what we call subskills, and all of the subskills are basically sort of added together, make that one skill. So when we're looking at reading, we can look at two different sort of sides of the subskills that make up reading. So first of all, we've got what we call bottom up. So really looking at reading in a sort of a minute level, and that includes things like word shapes. So for example, you'll see there that I've got elephant versus elephant. Which one is easier to read, lowercase or uppercase? What do you think? Lowercase, Safia, absolutely. And the reason for that is because you get the shape. So if you look at where my cursor's going, you go round, you go up, you go across, you go up, you go up, you go up like that, you go down. So it's got a very, very clear shape, and we use word shapes to help us decipher text. When we write in capital letters, the problem that we have is that all of the letters have the same shape, and it's actually really hard to read. Now, for those of you below a certain age, obviously caps lock these days, that just means shouting anyway, but it is a lot harder to read in uppercase. All right, so you'll often get parents who are very excited. Oh my goodness, my child can read the word elephant. They're a prodigy. It's not so much that they're a prodigy, it's just that it's got a very particular shape and they're able to distinguish it. Often they can't distinguish between pot, pat, because the shape looks the same, but they can read elephant. So that's really important. Also important, so our lexis, our vocabulary and our grammar, so we need both of those to be able to read, and we want to think about the lexis and the grammar that's relevant to the Common European Framework that our students are at. So there's no point giving them texts which are too difficult or too easy. We need to find texts that really sort of help them at their level. We can also look at subject specialisation. It might be that you can read a text at a much higher level in a subject that's really that you know a lot about. So for example, if you are teaching pilots, their lexis and grammar of anything sort of aeronautical is amazing, far better than mine. Same with doctors, their understanding of sort of medical vocabulary is way superior to mine, but because it's their subject specialisation. And cognates are just words that sound very similar in two different languages. So for example, if you wanted to say the word, I don't know, information. Well, information is very similar in pretty much all of the European languages. And that would be a cognate. So it's something that's very similar. And you can quickly pick it up without actually knowing that word already. Discourse and syntax. So discourse is, as we mentioned before, is just the things that join texts together. So it's your connective words, or your conjunctions, we sometimes call them. It's your sort of signposts, so firstly, secondly, thirdly, and finally, and your syntax, so your word order. So we need to sort of understand all of that to be able to follow a text. We also need top-down skills. So our top-down skills are things like our world knowledge. So we need to bring that into our reading as well. We need to be familiar with the text type. So for example, if you are a scientist and you are writing a report, you wouldn't start your report with, "It was a lovely sunny day when I walked into the laboratory." that doesn't sound like a scientific report. Grammatically, it's correct. The lexis is wonderful, but it's not coherent. It's not what I'm expecting. Similarly, if I do a story that starts with once upon a time, you would expect the ending to be happy, and they all lived happily ever after. However, if I start with once upon a time and then I end up with and they all died, that's not coherent. So we have certain sort of expectations of texts, okay, and we need to help our students with that. And also your personal experience, you bring that to a novel or you bring that to a piece of reading all the time. So those are some of the sub-skills that we use when we're reading. Now, things to consider when we're choosing texts for our students. We talk about the 80-20 rule, and the 80-20, I'm sorry, Olivia, what, I'm not, it's being recorded, my lovely, so if you need to go back, that's fine, or if there's a question, just give me a shout. So the 80-20 rule is very simply that students need to understand about 80% of a text. 20% should be a bit of a challenge, okay? If you are giving them texts where they only understand 50%, what do you think the effect on the student is? So if you've got only 50%, how do you think your confusion, Safia? It's very negative, Monty, yes. It really affects your confidence, doesn't it? It makes you sort of go, thank you, Safia, yes, lack of confidence, precisely. You know, you sort of start to think, oh my goodness, I can't do this. What happens if you give students a text where they understand 100%? Yeah, exactly. They're going to get disinterested, aren't they, if it's too difficult? And then if it's too easy, Safia, they just sort of disengage, don't they? It's like, oh, there's no challenge here. Yes. Oh, that's a really good point, Monty. I love that. You would probably give up if the text was too difficult, especially when people around you can do it. There's no, yes. You might get overconfident, Maisie. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we need to think about where our students are on the Common European Framework. And you'll remember that last week we talked about the levels. So we go from A1 and A2, which are our sort of beginning levels, then our B1, B2, which are our sort of intermediate levels, and then our C1 and our C2, which are our advanced proficiency. If anybody wants a little bit more information about the top down and the bottom up, if you go into Google and just type in reading sub-skills, top down, bottom up, you'll get loads of charts with it and you can have a look and find out a little bit more information, or ask me a question at the end. That's also cool. Think about age as well. So some texts might not be age appropriate. So I was working on a book this week. I was writing some materials on The Fault in Our Stars. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the book. If you aren't, it's a story about sort of teenagers with cancer. I cried buckets by the end of this book. I vowed never to teach it, but it is not, it wouldn't be appropriate for younger students, okay? So similarly, if you're doing a reading about sort of job adverts, again, that wouldn't be relevant for sort of 12-year-olds. So you've got to think about their age and also the interest, so the ability, sort of, you know, if they're going to be interested in the topic. So if you give students, for example, I don't know, a section from a medical journal, and they're all humanities students, they're probably not going to be very interested. The level might be perfect, but they're just not going to engage with the text. So we need to make sure that students engage with the text. You'll see there I've also said about the ability to exploit the text, and I'll show you what I mean in a moment with that. The ability to really do something exciting with the text to make it really interesting for our students in class. You'll see here I've also put down film and TV adaptations. You remember last week I was talking about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and being able to read a bit of a book and watch the film as well. It's a really, really good way to get people interested. So Harry Potter works very well, things like Slumdog Millionaire. There are loads and loads of adaptations, you know, of books. So it's a really good way of getting people excited about it. And also, can you use anything authentic? So, you know, you're showing people, you're really giving them a chance to engage with literature from the country, which is so motivating. And the fact that they've managed to read something that was written for English speakers is really exciting. So those are some of the considerations that we sort of need to think about. Now, I've got an example for you here. For those of you who are familiar with Lewis Carroll, we've got the Jabberwocky here. Don't worry, I don't expect you to read it all. There is the text. Do feel free to look it up on Google. However, you'll see. Now, if I just show you the text, easy to understand, do you think, for somebody who doesn't speak English? Oh, good, Safi, you've done a lot of fabulous, darling. Good, 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 good. No, it's not easy, is it, to understand? Why is it not easy? What is it? There's a lot of made up words, Maisie. Good. It's very cramped. Yes, in this particular, that's because I tried to fit it on a slide, Simon, and it doesn't. The language is difficult, isn't it? Because it's not sort of proper English. It's a lot of made up. Words. So if we have something like this, what's wonderful about this text is it really isolates the reading skills. Let me show you. So who's the speaker? So if we go back to the poem, who's the speaker? Now, Monty, have a little look through and work out father to son, Simon. Excellent. Now, how do you know it's a father and how do you know it's his son? What have you done with the text to find that answer? What's it saying, Olivia? It says my son, doesn't it? So we've scanned through and I found the words my son. Oh, good-o, lovely. So clearly it's a parent, but how do I know it's the father and not the mother? Because it could be the mother. Have a look through the rest of the text. Context is a fight. I like that, Simon, so therefore it's got to be the father. Exactly, Maisie. The text states it with the pronoun he. Good, easy, there we are. Brilliant, Safia. Yes, okay. So you can disregard most of the text, and what you've done there is you've scanned through for words that you understand, okay? And you've picked out, oh, my son, he. Right, I'm going to put those two things together. Must be the father to the son. Excellent. There you are, you see. So though you've already used some of your sub-skills of reading. Okay, you've looked out for the vocabulary that you understand in there. Good. Simon's put in there as well. He's thought about sort of the context. So it's a fight. Excellent. All right, so you've really isolated some of those reading skills. Good stuff. Now, what happened to the Jabberwocky? What happens to the Jabberwocky? Yep, had its head cut off, Maisie. Lovely. Yes. Head got chopped off. Marvellous. Well done, Safia. Yep, he's dead. Excellent. All right, now, and again, you've basically got rid of all the stuff that you can't follow, that's too complicated, and you've just gone in and you've found a little section that you do understand. So you can disregard most of the text and just focus on what you do understand. Now then, what do you think vorpal means? Sorry, we're going backwards and forwards today. Any idea what you think vorpal means? So just to point it out in the text. The vorpal blade went snicker snack. What do you reckon that is? Sharp, Safia. Absolutely, Olivia. Yes. Okay. And what you've done there is you've used some top-down skills. You've applied your world knowledge and you've thought, right, swords. Let me think about swords. I know that it's an adjective because it comes before the noun. So what adjective often describes a blade, a sword? Okay, probably sharp, because we also know that it's cut his head off. So it's not going to be blunt, is it? Okay, so excellent. So there you are. You've just demonstrated all of those sub-skills for reading. Well done. Fabulous. Okay, much simpler text. Is anybody familiar with Anthony Brown? I don't know if you are. He's just amazing. He was the child literature laureate a few years ago now, and his books are just beautiful. They're visually fabulous. Anthony Brown is ace. He is ace. That's the best way to describe him, my darling. I totally agree with you. So, and you'll see here, this is the actual page one. So I haven't edited it down. This is the amount of text that is on the page, and I do apologise. It's a little bit smaller, but it basically says Smudge, Mr. Smith, and Albert went into the park. Mrs. Smythe, Charles, and Victoria arrived soon afterwards. Okay, that's it. That's all the text there is on the page. Now then, there's some questions for you. I've left the picture up. So what differences do you notice between the two families? In fact, feel free to answer any of those questions. Do you think Mrs. Smythe, will be friendly? Do you think the children will become friends? Any thoughts? The kids will be friends. Yes, quite likely, Olivia, yes. Any other thoughts? Why do you think the kids will be friends, by the way? They both have dogs, Simon. Yes, absolutely. Because they go to the same park, possibly, Olivia. Yes, because it's a children's story. Yeah, Anthony Brown's a little bit dark, though, so it doesn't always follow. What do we know about children as well? How are children different to adults? They are generally very friendly, Monty. Yes, they are. What have they not learnt yet as well? They're not cautious, Monty. Yes, absolutely. They're not cautious, and they haven't learnt societal norms, Safia. Yes. So they just see another child. They don't see everything that perhaps an adult would see around it. They don't judge. Yeah, so perhaps one of them is a single father and the other is a single mother. Yes, absolutely. If you have a look as well, what do you notice about the names of the children? So Smudge is the girl, and Charles is the boy. What do you notice about the names? Yes, looks sort of like one of them is of a higher social class, doesn't it, Maisie? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's very royal names, isn't it? Charles and Victoria, and their proper name. Nickname, exactly. Smudge is a nickname, isn't it? So we've got nicknames on the one side, and we've got these very proper, as Simon says, royal names on the other. So we can start to see some sort of distinctions between the two families, can't we? By the way, did you know that the word nickname comes from the Old English eke name, which just means other name? So it used to be an eke name, and over time it got sort of shortened and changed into a nickname. There is my useless fact for the day for everybody. So yes, you can see, it might also tell you something about the gate as well. I don't know whether you can see what's the difference between the sort of, you know, she's walking past a very sort of closed park, whereas this side is very open. You can see as well the sort of, Anthony Brown uses lots of these sort of images. You can see the difference on the top of the cornerstones there. He's got a lot of what we call visual literacy. So you'll see my last question there is, what's the importance of teaching visual literacy? They do, Safia. Her clothes look a lot more dressed up, don't they? Absolutely. She's got on a proper hat and a proper sort of coat with, whereas Mr. Smith has got sort of like a flat cap on. It's very different, isn't it? So visual, yeah, so visual is really good for people with any sort of perhaps word processing skills. So if you've got dyslexia, for example, then visual literacy is great. Students remember better with visuals? Yes, to some extent they do. Yes. Any other reason? It's good for all of us, regardless of whether you prefer words, pictures, what have you. Why is visual literacy so important? Think about what everybody is using these days. Yeah, so students do learn really well with visuals, yes. Yes, Safia, that's exactly it, my darling. You can infer a lot of information from what's not said. So a picture is used often, for example, in journalism, in adverts, to convey something. It tries to influence our way of thinking. And we need to be able to understand that. We need to sort of help our students know when we're being, if you like, manipulated. So visual literacy is a really, really important part of reading. So if you think about, as I said, if you think about adverts, if you think about sort of reading newspapers, pictures are chosen very, very deliberately. And helping our students understand that gives them a real power. And the fact that everybody can understand a visual, yes, you can always find something to talk about it, can't you? Brilliant. Well done, everybody. So Cinderella, this is another of my favourite lessons. I love teaching this lesson. So can you remember the story? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to type it all out, but vaguely you remember, hopefully, that we've got a girl whose mother dies, the father remarries and remarries somebody who's not very nice. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but fairy tales do always have dead parents in them. Think about it, doesn't seem very child friendly, does it? But all the children love it. And for some reason, the father, when he remarries in fairy tales, never gets it right. He always makes a terrible choice. You do wonder sometimes what the fathers are thinking about, don't you? We often sort of, so what I do is I brainstorm the story and we do a lovely visual on the board and we sort of vaguely, and it also depends which version you've watched, so whether you've watched Disney or whether you've read the original fairy tale, because it's quite grim, the original. The stepsisters end up cutting their toes off to try and fit their feet in the slippers. Anyway, question for you, would you marry somebody you've only met once? What do you reckon? Yes, oh no, says Safia. Olivia, I'm assuming that your yes, of course, refers to the can you remember the story as opposed to the would you marry somebody once. However, do feel free to correct me. Lovely, yes. So Safia is saying no, Olivia is saying no. Anybody else? Would you marry anybody you'd only met once? Oh, you'd never marry anybody. Okay. No, that you'd only met once. Okay. Why not? Somebody, and I'm not going to name, says it depends on his income. Love it. Depends how long the first meet is. Ooh, good point, Monty. Good point. Olivia says she wouldn't because you don't know them. You can't really know them after one meeting. They're always on their best behaviour on the first date anyway, aren't they? Oh, interesting point, Safia. So if it's for a specific reason, so perhaps you're helping somebody get a visa, let's say that too. Yeah. So maybe you're doing it for another purpose. Absolutely. Can you think of any situations in the world where somebody might marry somebody they've only just met? Yes, exactly, Simon. Arranged marriages. Yes. Very good. Royal family. Yes, arranged marriages. Yeah. Good. Yeah, for family business, Danny. Good point. Absolutely. Yes. And I do have a number of friends around the world who have arranged marriages, and they've been together for a long time. Some of them have worked. Some of them haven't. I also taught in Saudi Arabia and met a lovely lady who refused to get married for an arranged marriage and got married for love, and was ostracised by her village for a long time. So, you know, you do come across these situations. It does still exist. So, is there anything we can learn from Cinderella? What do you think about the story? Is there any sort of tales, morals in there that are good for us to learn? I have to say, if you're a man and you end up marrying for a second time, be careful, would be my. Always get married for love, says Olivia. Yeah, that's a good read. That's a good moral to come out of the story. Anything else? Kindness is more important. Yes. Choose somebody who you like. Yes. Get your shoe size right. I know. I have a real problem with Cinderella and the shoe. Why doesn't the shoe change back? Why does it stay glass? Everything else changes apart from the shoe. And also, if it fits so well, why did it fall off in the first place? Humility is always rewarded. Remember your partner's face. Yes, don't rely on finding the person whose shoe fit. I know, such a good point, Danny. Good. It shows gender roles, which aren't so good. Maisie, you are so on my lines, my darling, which brings me nicely to my third question. What problems might fairy tales like these cause? Think about the language. Think about a fairy tale wedding or a fairy tale romance, or the handsome prince, or stepmothers. Any problems? Cultural issues? Absolutely, Safia. Totally agree with you. Any other problems? Lots. Yes, lots of news. I'm thinking more of sort of society problems, gender politics. Simon, absolutely. I've got complete thing about this. Any other problems? As I said, class, yes. Gender problems, yes. Think about the word. Think about stepmother. What sort of connotation? Absolutely, it creates and it reinforces stereotypes, Chloe. Absolutely. You try, exactly, Olivia. Stepmothers particularly are evil. So if you go into a class of 8-year-olds and you say something about a stepmother, watch their face. They've all read the fairy stories. They all think that step-parents are preconceptions of people, yes. And think about, Oh, I want a fairy tale wedding. Okay, so some of these words have come into our language. So what I often do with my students, because this is very much lower order thinking skills. Can you remember the story? So you're recalling, you're doing basic comprehension. We're right at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. Great, they all understand the story, fabulous. Here we're moving up the higher order thinking, so I'm starting to get them to marry their world knowledge with the text. And then here, what I want them to do is write a new version of the story. So I always say to them, you have to write it, Cinderella has to go to the ball, and from there on, you can write a new version. I've had some fabulous ones. One of my particular favourites was, after the ball, the prince goes looking for Cinderella, and he gets to Cinderella's house, but he finds somebody who's even better looking than Cinderella, so he decides to marry her and kicks her into touch. And a year later they have a baby, but the baby's very ugly, and the prince can't understand why, because his wife is gorgeous, he's gorgeous. And then it turns out he accidentally married one of the ugly sisters, but she'd been to Korea for cosmetic surgery. He's so horrified that he divorces her and goes to look for Cinderella, but she's not having any of it. She started her own successful shoe emporium online. So you get some really, really interesting versions, and I did one at a school just before the coronavirus, and they managed to bring coronavirus into the story. Fabulous. So you can really have fun with this, and there are no right or wrong answers. It's one of my favourite lessons to teach. One little 8-year-old came up with, she said they got married, and then after about 3 months, Cinderella realised that the prince was really lazy and didn't pull his weight around the house, so she divorced him. 8 years old. So that's a really clear way of, you can see that you can, as I said, you start off with the lower order thinking skills and we build to the higher order thinking skills. Harry Potter, again, really great book to use, obviously, because everybody's read it in their own language and most people have seen the film. And quite simple one here, just a straightforward match. So all you have to do is match the character to the description. So Albus Dumbledore, for those of you who are not familiar, head teacher of Hogwarts, etc. So very simple lower order thinking there. I'm just making sure that the students remember we're just doing sort of basic comprehension here. Then we might move on. So I've got, for example, how many presents does Dudley receive on his birthday? And if I remember rightly, it's something like 26. And he gets very upset because he got 26 last year, but then somebody gives him one and he gets 27. Okay, so basic comprehension, but you'll see the next question. What does this tell us about Dudley? So the fact that he's got 27 presents, he's not happy with 26. He has to have 27. What do you think that tells us about him? Oh, is it 36, Safia? Thank you. I couldn't remember how many it was. Spoilt little brat. Absolutely, he is a spoiled brat. So we're adding our world knowledge together with the clues in the text to get the answer. Okay, the snake enclosure. He's spoilt. He's greedy and ungrateful, Maisie. Absolutely selfish, says Olivia. Good, yes. Not good that he's selfish, but good answers. At the snake enclosure, I don't know if you remember, but Harry speaks Parseltongue and the snakes escape. And the Dursleys get very sort of like angry and they're obviously very scared. So again, you'll see those two questions are lower order thinking skills. So I'm just asking them to read the text and feed back to me. But then my next question is, do you think this is fair? So do you think there's a right or wrong answer for that? So if I ask students, do you think this is fair? Do you think there's a right or wrong answer? Exactly, it's an opinion, Safia, yes, and I don't mind what their opinion is. As long as they're able to justify it, I don't mind. but you have to be able to tell me why. Okay, so again, you can see we're moving around here between the lower order and the higher order thinking skills. Now, I think, Monty, you asked me last week, what do you do if somebody's falling behind or somebody's struggling with your class? This is a really good example of what you can do. So if you know that somebody finds your class quite difficult, just ask them to do the first, to do the lower, so just mark the lower order thinking skills questions for them. So just get them to focus on this one and this one, and maybe this, because they're able to give an opinion. Okay, but really the lower order thinking skills, and you might stop and just help them with this one. So you might sort of point it out in the text to them and just help them write the answer. And then when you're doing feedback with the class, you go to the person that you've helped and you say, Tom, what's the answer to number 1? And Tom says 36, and you go, brilliant. You know he's got the right answer. You're building his confidence in front of the class. He knows that he's got the right answer, and he knows that because you've asked him that question, you're probably not going to ask him another one. Okay, so that's a really good way of helping students develop in your class without making it really obvious that they're perhaps struggling. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some ideas of how to bring reading into the classroom, and you can make it exciting. It doesn't have to be boring. So it's not about, reading isn't about sitting there with a long piece of text and just answering comprehension questions. You can make it really interactive, you can make it really fun, you can get people moving around your classroom, you can get them sort of really sort of thinking and being creative, and it's one of the skills I love teaching best. So next time, as this session closes, you will get a little sort of link just to write down any questions that you want to ask me for Wednesday, because Wednesday is our last session, so we're going to have a look at what to do next and to deal with any questions and answers that you guys have got. So I want to make it very sort of focused on you and what you'd like to know. And as always, does anybody have any questions on today's session? Olivia, I do appreciate you want to have a look at the other two slides. So it was the top down and the bottom up. As I said, if you go into Google and just put in reading skills top down, bottom up, you should see quite a few charts that have got those two sort of top down, bottom up with the sub skills in there. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to comment on? Leslie, yes, there is, my darling. There's a multiple choice, there's some questions and answers at the end. Okay, so Olivia, online, yes, we're going to be looking at that on Wednesday. So there are some links that I'm going to put together in my resource section for you to have a look at. Any questions? You're most welcome, Olivia. Okay, if not, please go and have a lovely, lovely day ahead. Those of you who are revising, the very best of luck. And I hope your week is incredibly productive. As I said, A-levels, I think, are the hardest things to do. Life gets easier after A-levels. Janet, you've got a general question about cultural appropriateness, yeah? Yeah, you do need to be careful. Some stories don't work in all countries. So things like Three Little Pigs doesn't work in places that are very sort of strong Muslim culture, for example. Young learners in Vietnam. Honestly, most stories work really well. You'd be amazed. Lots of my friends in India have read sort of fiction written in the UK, and they've never visited the UK and they think it's great. So most things are appropriate. It's absolutely fine. Just, I suppose, be careful that there's nothing in there about sort of religion or politics. Sort of try and keep it a little bit neutral, but fairy tales and kids stories work really, really well, and most of them are really familiar with things like Harry Potter, anything Roald Dahl, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is really popular. What else have we been using? Things like His Dark Materials, although be careful, that's got a sort of a slight religious theme to it, so you do need to be a bit careful with that one. What else have we read in class? Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Horrible Henry. Tom Sawyer's quite, Dickens and Sawyer tend to be much higher levels, so I wouldn't, with young kids, I wouldn't introduce anything that complex until they're a little bit older, sort of teenagers. So for young kids, and also when you're dealing with children up until they're about sort of 6, 7, you want single story books. So the whole story is in one book. They can't actually do chapter books until they're about 8 or 9 because they don't have the memory skills to hold a story. Enid Blyton, anything like that's always good. So go to the sort of the classical stuff that's quite safe. Cool, great questions. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time today. Always lovely to see you. Have a great day ahead, and I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Don't forget to write down any questions for me that you want me to answer. Okay, have a lovely day. Bye for now.